TAM's Supermax prison was designed for one thing: sensory deprivation, permanent solitary confinement. No phone calls, no contact visits, no communal activity. No yard, classroom, cafeteria, or chapel. Men never leave the cell except to exercise alone in a concrete pen. Food is pushed through a slot in the cell door. In 2001, I organized a project where you could ask family members about their loved ones in TAMs. I also made an experimental video that compares the lives of prisoners and astronauts. Years passed, and men were still in TAMs. This situation felt like a parable. There's an artist, and there's a man in the bottom of the well. At what point does the artist, who knows so much about this man, become a bystander to his suffering? In 2006, a group of artists, poets, and musicians started the TAMS Poetry Committee to provide the men with some social contact. We sent poems, they sent poems. Hi, committee, is this for real? I can't believe someone cares enough to send a pick-me-up to the worst of the worst. They wrote us about their hallucinations, self-mutilation, and suicide attempts. One man in TAMS finally wrote, "Hey, this poetry is great, but could you please tell the governor what they're doing to us down here?" In 2008, I turned to legislative art. I became the organizer of TAMS Year 10, a grassroots campaign to reform the Supermax. It was the 10-year anniversary of its opening. Prison reform is hard enough, but getting people to stand up for Supermax prisoners was considered hopeless. The campaign had two organizing principles. One, let the men from TAMS speak for themselves. They can undo the myth of the worst of the worst. Two, every event had a goal. Ask for a concrete political action and keep track of it. Not permitted, just putting information out into the ether. This crusade was both aspirational and tactical. We not only targeted decision makers, but volunteered for them to build relationships. We held hearings, introduced legislation, negotiated with the Department of Corrections, pulled in international human rights monitors, and organized rallies, prayer vigils, and cultural projects. We set up a service to allow you to donate frequent flyer miles to buy magazines for prisoners, thus sending the surplus of travelers to men who never leave their cell. We launched photo requests from solitary, so men could request a photograph of anything at all, back one, real or imagined, such as my auntie's house at 63rd and Marshfield facing east at 2 p.m., a prayer vigil at Bald Knob Cross to pray for my deliverance from TAMS, a lovesick clown with a feather pen and a scroll. In 2009, Governor Quinn appointed a new corrections chief to review the Supermax, and he announced a plan for reform. We had cracked the nut. Last year, our governor proposed the outright closure of TAMS. However, the powerful guards union launched a fear-mongering campaign to keep it open for the jobs. The once progressive union AFSCME, who Martin Luther King marched with in Memphis in 1968, fought for a prison that drives men to suicide. The mothers of prisoners lobbied in Springfield, these are their lobbying cards, and marched to AFSCME headquarters. They said, "My son is not a paycheck, and torture is a crime, not a career." This January, after a long, painful battle, Governor Quinn shut it down. Isaiah's dad is in TAMS. He drew this and we sent it to the men and they loved it. They described their journey back into the world of sensation. David wrote, "Our natural human senses, having been so repressed at TAMS, were suddenly and shockingly activated simply by boarding the IDOC bus. The smell of diesel fumes was overwhelming, foreign yet familiar, comforting and nauseating, pleasurable yet unsettling." Joe said, "When I first heard of the TAMS Poetry Committee, I thought I needed a poem like I needed to spend a 25th hour in that box. Who would have known?" We are still advocating for these men at their new prisons and proudly working on Governor Quinn's reelection. As an artist with real-world political goals, I needed to engage with government systems. Prison policies are made by governments, so you turn to governments to change them. That's legislative art. For Creative Capital, we are going to illustrate the absurdities of the prison system with a variety show called The Honey Bun Comedy Hour. It will depict the horror, boredom, and small mercies of prison life. The show is named after the honey bun because it is one of the rare joys in prison, but also an addiction and a form of currency that can lead to violence and chaos. I'm sure you've heard of the honey bun industrial complex. Inspired by Brechtian epic theater, the skits and reenactments will illustrate ridiculous policies. This is Denise. She drives 6 hours to see her husband and is refused a non-contact visit after they discover a butter knife in her trunk. Janice gets a phone call by a person eating a sandwich. Ms. Burnham, your brother died. Pick up the body today or we cremate it. And this is Faggy, who has schizophrenia and spent 14 years in TAMS, and he smeared feces so much that they painted his cell with a special coating so they could spray it out. He tried to hang himself, and he gets a bill of $5.30 for the sheet he damaged. The goal is reform. We hope these skits will allow the department and the public to reflect on these policies and change them. There'll be dozens of other segments, such as prisoner soliloquies, warden monologues, best bureaucrat award, tales from under the bus. Those are people that advocates consider too unsympathetic to advocate for, like anyone who's not a juvenile. And some really other absurd stuff I don't have time to describe. Okay. Together, it's a variety show, but individual segments will be shown as part of targeted campaigns to, say, a legislator at church, a warden in his office, lawmakers in Springfield, at meetings, on cable access, anywhere they're needed to influence policy. We want to channel our excess painful knowledge about prisons towards concrete reforms. We need people who are excited about this experiment to help with production, project management, and theater workshops. Artists are well qualified to affect law and policy. We're used to attempting the impossible, and we have the freedom of the outsider. We are in the world, not of it. I'm enthusiastic about legislative art because it is stimulating, unpredictable, and rewarding, but mainly because it is necessary.